On This Week in Enterprise Tech, Microsoft is on autopilot, NTP attacks get amplified, and yeah, it's a broadband war for it all. Twiet on the set.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust. This is Twit.
Bandwidth for This Week in Enterprise Tech is provided by CacheFly at CacheFly.com.
This is Twiet. This Week in Enterprise Tech, Episode 80, recorded February 24th, 2014. There's nothing to see here. This Week in Enterprise Tech is brought to you by Jira, an Atlassian product. Jira is the project management solution for teams planning, building, and launching great products. To learn more about Jira and try it free for 30 days, visit Atlassian.com/Twiet. And by RingCentral. The cloud-based phone system we use just got better with the launch of Meetings, the full-service video conference feature. Zero startup costs, and RingCentral starts at under $25 a month per user. Try it now with a 30-day risk-free trial and buy one desk phone and get a second phone free, up to 20 phones. Call 800-543-9980 or visit ringcentral.com and use our promo code TWIT. Welcome to Twiet, This Week in Enterprise Tech. It's the show dedicated to the enterprise professional, the IT pro, and the geek who just wants to know how the world is connected. I'm your host, Father Robert Ballister, the digital Jesuit, your guide to all things in the enterprise. And I'm joined by an all-star cast of geeks, starting with my good friend. He's been away from the show for a while, but we're so happy that he's back, Mr. Curtis Franklin from Enterprise Efficiency. Curtis, standard weather check. What is it like over in Florida?
Well, you know, Padre, for us, it's a cool and rainy kind of late winter day. It's only up in the low 70s. Bit gray, but as we always say here in Florida, we can use the rain.
We can use it. We could use some here in California as well. Now, a man who does need no rain, because I understand it's just getting dumped all over them, is Mr. Lou Maresca. He's a senior code warrior with Microsoft. Lou, so good to have you back. But I think you've kind of overdosed on Twit, right? I mean, you were on Padre's Corner, you're on This Week in Enterprise Tech, you're on Coding 101.
I'm loving it, man.
Yeah.
Love being on Twit. Coding 101 is a great show. You guys should check it out.
Coding 101, yeah, no. But, you know, we don't like to cross-promote shows on the Twit TV network. I mean, I wouldn't want you to say something like Coding 101 could be found on Thursdays on the Twit TV network at live.twit.tv every Thursday at 1:30 p.m. No, we won't do that. But let's get straight into the stories, because we've got actually, it's a good thing that you're on here, Lou, because we've got some Microsoft-centric enterprise bites. Let's start with Microsoft on autopilot. That's right. Now, autopilot allows Microsoft to synchronize resources across millions of servers and across hundreds of petabytes of storage. It's their homegrown system for doing cloud services, for doing redundant services. Now, autopilot has been used by Microsoft for years and years and years, but we haven't seen it or heard from it because it's been an in-house development. They haven't really wanted to tell people about it because it's like the worst kept secret at Microsoft. Now, there's speculation that since Nadella is taking over Microsoft, and since he grew up in the division that uses autopilot, that we could see this super flexible and powerful technology being used across more Microsoft platforms. Now, Lou, I want to throw this over to you first because you've got experience with it. What exactly does autopilot do?
Sure. Well, it basically completely automates your infrastructure, your watchdogs, everything that has to do with either hardware, errors on the operating system, installing the operating system, power consumption. From the beginning to the end, what Microsoft did in the beginning was they kind of went out to the industry standard leaders in IT and so on. They asked them what they were doing when it came to handling their own servers and how they handled redundancy and how they handled failover. And then they also looked internally into all the services that we previously had, MSN and so on, and how they were handling such things. And they wanted to basically automate everything and improve that capability. So they went pretty much all the way to the point where you could basically have a machine that fails and it almost instantaneously can fail over to the next machine as if there was no interruption in service whatsoever. And to be able to do that is completely amazing. It's a phenomenon from that. They like to call it fungible, which basically means seamlessly replacing it So it's kind of one of those things that, like you said, it's an unforeseen hero when it comes to services, when it comes to Bing and Azure and so on. But it's something that we use internally all the time.
Yeah. Curtis, let me throw this over to you, because autopilot, as Lou mentioned, it's an unsung hero over at Microsoft. It would be crude to call it just an SDN system. Yes, it is kind of software-defined networking, but as Lou was explaining, there's so much more. There's intelligence built in to autopilot. A good example would be, we've talked about Microsoft's containerized data centers in the past. This idea of taking a standard 40-foot shipping container, loading up with servers and power equipment, basically everything you would need to have a data center on wheels, and then shipping it off to wherever they need more capacity. Well, we didn't know that autopilot was actually the thing that powered those containerized data centers. When they needed more power, they would load up a shipping container or two, put it into the place where they needed it, and then turn it on, and autopilot would automatically sync all those servers to the millions of servers that Microsoft had all around the world, to all the storage. It would make decisions about power distribution and cooling. It was one of these things that if we had known Microsoft was doing this, if it was a much less kept secret, I think everyone would have agreed, yeah, Microsoft's in the lead. What would you like to see Microsoft do with autopilot?
Well, I think from the enterprise perspective, there are a couple of options. One, of course, is to simply productize it and to roll it out as a stated part of what they're doing. They have a lot of options with this. I mean, they can productize it. They could make it a specific SKU that goes out underpinning some of their other services, especially the sort of thing that ties their exchange-based hosted pieces to Azure, something that bridges those. They could offer it, pardon me, as something that their partners, their service-providing partners can deliver. And through this, not only the people who are just MSPs, but some of their integration partners, say integrators at a certain level, can offer this to their customers. The big thing, though, is that this is the kind of technology that is going to be absolutely critical for a particular very valuable level of customer. And that's the customer that is just a little too small to be rolling their own solutions. Let's say they're not quite at the Amazon level of being able to roll their own solutions, and yet they are big enough to really have a critical need for moving things like containerized data centers around. You know, that takes the global, starting at global number 10 or 12, down to global 1000, and says, here is something that you have been screaming for since the first time you had a glimpse of the word cloud. This is the sort of thing that, handled properly, really could be an enormous game-changing win for Microsoft and the enterprise.
Right. I want to go back over to you, Lou, because there's been a lot of speculation as to why this hasn't been a service that Microsoft has touted. If they have something that seems to be so successful now that the wraps are coming off, something that is so good at what it does, something that honestly seems years and years ahead of anything that its competitors have, people have been saying, well, they didn't want to push it because they've been trying to push this image that at Microsoft, all their systems run on all the software that you can buy, right? So they don't want to tell you that they've got something that's in-house. They would rather have you believe that it's all products that you could purchase from your Microsoft representative. My question to you would be this. Now that we see this, now that we see how Microsoft is probably going to start tooting its own horn a little bit, and now that we've seen Microsoft do things like donate specs to the Open Compute project, do you think that autopilot is something that Microsoft would ever let out of the barn door and say, okay, guess what? We're now going to let you buy it, or we're now going to let you source it?
I mean, I'm not going to pretend to know why they haven't productized it yet, but when I do, personally, what I think is, this type of product has taken them so long to kind of nail down, especially with all the different hardware vendors and all the different software vendors, as well as the operating system, to just make sure, because I guess the budget systems that they're potentially using at the scale that they're using it is not necessarily a normal scenario that customers or partners have in that scenario. Basically, budget hardware at what they call they have a steady state called a constant state of failure, because when you're using budget hardware at the scale and at the amount of time and amount of resources that are required for such services as Bing and other things, then they're always failing. And so they needed a system to be able to handle that. And I think that's just something they've built over a long period of time, and they've never really had the chance to productize it. So it could be something that they do, you know, like you said, now with their open source data centers that they're doing, it could be one of those services that we, you know, that they pull out of the barn and say, hey, here's something that we can productize and, you know, test and verify from multiple different scenarios. But for right now, it's built explicitly for the services that Microsoft supplies and at the scale that Microsoft supplies it at. So I don't know if that's something that they're going to be able to change in the future.
Well, I'm hoping that we can keep tabs on this story. I would love at some point to get a Microsoft representative who works intimately with Autopilot, who could maybe demonstrate a little bit about how this service works, because it does sound incredible. Now let's move on to the second enterprise bite, which also concerns Microsoft. Unfortunately, it's not quite the same positive tenor. This concerns Lync, Australian, for domestic surveillance. Now, of course, we're all going to be a little sensitive about surveillance right now. We know that the NSA spy program has had a lot of embarrassing secrets released about it. But at the Lync conference last week in Las Vegas, just actually ending last Friday, a software developer by the name of Event Zero demonstrated how the data collected by Lync as just part of its regular maintenance could be used to, well, do a big data interpretation that would give you things like what employees were having interoffice romances, who was looking for another job, who was communicating too much with a competitor, and in effect, spy on them by the types of communications that they were doing within the Lync platform. Again, I want to throw this to you first, Lou, because you use Lync every day. I mean, it's your homegrown communication platform. Right. There's going to be people who look at this and they're shocked and they're shaken. But just between us, every enterprise product that tries to do any sort of real-time communication is going to have to collect the same data that Lync is collecting, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm just confused by this story. I don't know if this specific hacker or person just needed to find another thing to present about, that they were just missing content, but it doesn't make anybody who's a PBX admin from the previous years or from, you know, decade knows that they wish they had such data. And then now Lync is actually providing that data for admins. So you have to be an admin of the machine to be able to collect that information off that server. And, you know, for admins to be able to get this, you know, to be able to handle things around, you know, call quality and dropped calls and bandwidth used, network injection, all that information. And I guess similar systems out in the cloud, I bet you they could probably, if I went to other cloud services, I'm not going to name names, but if I went to other cloud services out there that do email and so on, I bet you they could probably run the same type of you know, AI or data collection algorithms on it to figure out about, you know, what you're doing during the day. In fact, I think there's services purchased by companies like Apple that can determine your schedule throughout the day based off of the cloud services you use. And so I don't necessarily agree with this article. I guess even in the article, he basically says, oh, yeah, same data can be pulled from other VoIP systems, too. I mean, I guess it doesn't make any – I don't know what the presentation was about. I'm just confused. Yeah.
I think, you know, to be clear, also to be fair, they did say, look, this is information that will be available from other enterprise platforms. They just use Lync as an example because since Lync has a lot of hooks, it was easier to pull the data out of Lync. But again, as you said, that's a feature. That's not a bug. It's not like Lync is leaking information. Lync has a, what do they call it? The performance center, the administrative center, the control panel that lets you see all this data. All these people were doing is taking that data and using it to correlate certain activities that were happening within your enterprise. Now, I want to toss this over to you, Curtis, because I think what Lou was talking about exposes a big conflict, a big problem, a big disconnect that we have between IT people and, say, executives or just the regular user. I was down at the Interop warehouse the other day, and we were talking about all the NSA speculation. And we were talking about how there are people who come up to us and say, well, you're spying on me. And the answer of an IT person should be, yeah. That's what we do. If you're on our network, we're looking at your data. We're trying to figure out where we need to put resources, where we need to have extra equipment and extra services. So to you, when you have an executive who reads an article like this and starts saying, oh, well, I didn't realize we were spying on our employees. There's all sorts of legal obligations that we have to meet. How do you deal with that? I mean, how do you tell an executive who's probably a little gun-shy about anything that sounds like spying that, no, we actually need to do this, and no, this is completely normal?
Well, I think one of the important things you tell the executive is that you've been doing it for a long time. Network administrators have been gathering as much information as they could from every data source possible for as long as possible. As everyone has pointed out, this is what you do if you want to present reliable, sustainable, high-performance bandwidth to your enterprise. It's just part of the game. This isn't new. It's not exciting. It's just part of doing business. Now, if you've got an executive who's getting upset about it, what you tell them is the truth. We've been doing this forever. Are we doing more of it now? Probably, because the tools are getting better. Have we run it past our legal department? Yeah, they know about it. We have policies in place. There's no news here. There's nothing to see. Move along. For those in the enterprise IT space, there's absolutely no news value to this. For those executives who have been paying attention, there's no news value to this. The only people who are surprised are people who are frankly coming at this from the consumer angle, who have been blissfully unaware of what's required to make the data they depend upon available to them on a reliable basis. Now they're finding out, and once in a while, it surprises them in a way that isn't pleasant. Well, that's the way the network operates. Get used to it, or go back to your kite string and oatmeal tins.
Lou, I like that. Actually, I love that line from Curtis. There's nothing to see here. Move along. I mean, it sounds strange, but as an IT person yourself, as a technology person yourself, do you sometimes want to give that answer to people who are saying, well, why are you spying on me? Why are you looking at my emails? Why are you looking at my phone calls? It's getting to the point of, yeah, if you're using our network, if you're using our resources, of course we're going to be doing this. This is why you hired us. This is our job. Is that something that's feasible? Could you actually start expecting people to understand that this is just the cost of being on a high technology network?
I think it's the wave of I mean, customers just don't understand that, like, when you use services, it doesn't matter what the service is, that they should be responsibly using that data to supply you with a better service, whether it's whether it's a social network or it's a communication device like Skype or other services that are out there. They are crowdsourcing data in order to provide you with a better service. And it's a tough sell because, like you said, there's always these leak stories coming out. And I don't think it'll ever be accepted from a normal consumer aspect. But from a technologist or from a geek perspective, people understand that the amount of data, big data that's out there today, if you can make sense out of it all and make useful information, useful customer services, then it's something that they're going to do. I mean, if you're on services like Facebook or other systems, you have sometimes personal information on there. It doesn't mean that they don't use that information to make the service better. And I think that's something that we're just going to have to, over time, hopefully evolve and understand.
Good words. Now, when we come back, we're going to be talking all about NTP amplification attacks, why you need to know what they are, and how to defend against them. But before that, I want to take a moment to talk about the first sponsor of the Quiet Riot, and that is Atlassian and their product, Jira. Now, Jira is one of the world's most powerful and customizable issue and project management systems. It can easily capture and enhance your workflow so that you can prioritize and take action on what's important while staying up to date with the activity going on around you. Jira lets you easily capture, organize, and prioritize your team's issues, tasks, features, and bugs, giving your team a simple, intuitive interface for collaborating with one another in real time. Jira lets you seamlessly integrate your planning documents, your backlog, your issues, and your code repository all on one platform and all on one screen, which is important if you've ever run one of these project teams, having all that information at a glance. Who's working on what code modules have been completed, what's coming up in the future. Well, it's just absolutely invaluable. Jira lets you set up your business process any way you like, any way you can imagine, so that your team works the way that they want, not the way that the software wants them to work. You get to define your own issues, types to track the information that matters most to your team, and then you can stay in the loop with notifications via email, chat, @mentions, or RSS and monitor streams of activity, or self-updating reports and dashboards. In other words, Jira lets you always be in the know. It lets you expand infinitely in any direction with thousands of Jira add-ons, including test management, time tracking, project management, and hundreds of other uses. Now, if your issues involve code, here's where Jira really shines, because Jira ties everything together from the initial planning to the files and change sets in your code repository, all the way through to deployment. Jira's integration with Git allows teams to follow their code from development all the way through delivery in one system. They can actually see how the code has progressed as the project has grown. And you can even build onto Jira yourself with the power of Atlassian's REST APIs. Jira is flexible and simple enough for a 5-person startup, but powerful and reliable enough for a 100,000-person enterprise. Jira is used by over 25,000 companies, including 70% of the Fortune 100 and NASA itself. They sit at the heart of Atlassian's offerings for managing your entire application development process from concept to launch. So here's what we want you to do. We want you to try Jira. We want you to go to Atlassian and see if maybe it is the perfect thing for your project. Go to Atlassian.com/Twiet for more information on Jira. Monthly plans start at $10 a month for up to 10 users, and you can try it free for 30 days. Remember, Atlassian.com/Twiet. That's Atlassian.com/Twiet, and select Try It for free. And we thank Atlassian for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Now let's get to it. We welcome to the show, I believe this is his 3rd time on This Week in Enterprise Tech, Mr. Brandon Ross. Brandon, the Chief Network Architect of Network Utility Force, thank you for coming back to speak with us.
Thank you for having me back again.
Now, I'm just going to gander a guess here, but looking at your picture, I'm thinking that maybe you're at the Interop hot stage?
Yes, I am. We've just about halfway through building the network for Interop Las Vegas 2014.
Got it. Okay, and it's nice to have you here. Now, Brandon, we're here to talk all about NTP. That's Network Time Protocol Server Amplification attacks. It's become sort of the attack of the day. It's the thing that people are using now. Let's chit-chat a little bit about what goes behind an NTP attack. Now, we know that it's UDP based. We know that the attacker spoofs the IP address of the system that he wants to attack, and then he sends requests to an NTP server. That NTP server will then respond to the request, but it actually responds to the IP address of the client, the server that you want to attack. It doesn't sound like a lot, but it is an asymmetrical attack. In other words, I can take 1 megabit of connection speed, branch out through a couple of compromised computers with 1 gigabit of internet connectivity, and hit, say, 400 different NTP servers, winding up in 400 gigabits of attack traffic. Basically, a massive DDoS that is impossible to track. Now, I want to ask you, why is it important that it's a UDP-based attack?
Well, UDP is particularly easy to create these attacks with because it's stateless. So in TCP, you have to do that 3-way handshake that we're all pretty familiar with in order to even start any real data flow. So it's very difficult to basically impossible to make a TCP-based protocol into an application attack, which is why we see NTP being a problem with UDP. But remember, we've had UDP attacks, amplification attacks for a long time. You know, there's been a recent DNS exploit that causes a DNS amplification attack. But if you go way, way back in time to the late 90s, you might remember an attack called the Smurf attack, which was also an amplification attack. However, it was not UDP. It was based on ICMP. It was based on ping. But the point is that it's not TCP is what makes it useful in an attack scenario.
Right, right. Now, we often hear, anytime you read about an NTP amplification attack, you hear about the asymmetrical nature of the attack, that an attacker doesn't need nearly as much bandwidth to start the attack as is sustained against the target. Why is this important? Why is it important that it's an asymmetrical attack?
Right. Actually, that's critical because when you have a symmetrical attack, well, it's not really symmetrical. When you have a direct attack, let's call it that, where I use my device or a bunch of devices to simply generate a whole bunch of traffic and send it directly at a target, it's easy to track that, right? If I did that here with my laptop sitting next to me, it wouldn't take too long before the service provider was able to see, that traffic is coming from my laptop and shut down my internet, my network port, or however I'm connected to the internet. Similarly, with distributed attacks that are not based on amplification, you might have 100 or 1,000 or 1,000,000 machines that you control that you use to create an attack, but it's the same thing. They're sending so much traffic, but you can tell where they're coming from. With an amplification attack, it becomes much more difficult. You're yet another step removed from the source, of the actual attack. And on top of it, the difficulty of tracing, since it amplifies, you don't need as many resources in order to create a very effective attack against the victim.
Right, right. Now, one of the other reasons that have been given for the effectiveness of an NTP amplification attack is that in a standard DDoS attack, let's say that you've got a network of zombified, compromised computer systems, and you send a bunch of attack traffic at a particular target, ISPs are pretty good about mitigating that attack. In fact, Cloudflare is really good at mitigating that attack. You block it upstream. You get some things like F5s, Viperian boxes that ask for a proof of work for every packet received, and you can very well mitigate a DDoS. Something about an NTP amplification attack is different, right?
Well, yes and no. Like we just said, the direct attacks are easier to trace down. But remember, the problem with attacks and the goal of these types of attacks is not necessarily to penetrate into an end system, but to simply overwhelm either the end system or often simply the upstream connection of that end system. So you may have a very effective attack mitigation strategy within your data center protecting your servers, so the servers themselves will perform fine. But if the upstream links you have to the internet are completely full of bogus traffic, you're still in trouble.
Right, right. Now,
and the amplification attack makes it easier to fill up that link because you only need, like you said before, 1 meg or 1 gig of capability while you're using other people's systems to generate 100 gig of traffic.
Right. Now, 2 weeks ago, Cloudflare mitigated a 400 gigabit per second NTP amplification attack. 3 weeks ago, Doge House was hit by a 200 gigabit per second NTP amplification attack. My question to you is, why does this work? If we know that the time servers are being used as an asymmetrical attack, so in other words, I can send a very small request and get back a very large answer from an NTP server, and that's what causes it to be an amplification attack. Why does this work? Why are these systems so vulnerable?
Well, I mean, again, as most security problems on the internet we have to trace this back to the original trusting nature of the internet. When the internet was first created, as we all know, it was a research network. The people on the network all knew each other, and you didn't need strong security to protect yourself against people doing silly things. The NTP protocol has been around for a very long time. No one really had strongly considered the ramifications of some of the operations within that protocol. But really, the biggest problem in this particular attack and why this is possible is simply that some functions of the NTP server that actually aren't required to be exposed out to the general internet are on by default in a couple of the implementations of NTP out on the marketplace. That's an unfortunate default, and it's very fixable. But now our problem is just reaching out to so many different end users and enterprises and servers to get them to change the config of their NTP server so that it doesn't support that function anymore to the public.
Right. Now, anytime I've heard about NTP amplification attacks, it's always attached to BCP38. What is BCP38 and why is it always mentioned in the same breath as NTP amplification?
Sure. So BCP stands for Best Current Practice. It's like an RFC, if you're familiar with RFCs from the IETF, except instead of defining a standard protocol, it is prescribing what the community feels is a best practice of the community. So BCP 38 in particular tells you that you should not allow, as a network operator, you should not allow spoofing. You should not allow any devices on your network to transmit packets with a source address that has not been assigned to that device, right? That's because that's the way all of these attacks are created, is by spoofing the source address in an attack packet that then, where that source address is the actual address of the victim machine, and then you send that packet to an NTP server that has been unpatched, and then that NTP server will respond to that source address with a much bigger packet.
Right. We got Sandman in the chat room who's saying, look, ISPs don't filter egress addresses. If they were filtering their egress addresses and actually verifying where that traffic was going to and where it's coming from, would that prevent NTP amplification attacks?
Absolutely it would, and that's the message that we want to get out there today. So thank you for posting that. There's a tool called, and I believe you have a lower third for this, called the Spoofer Project. If you download the Spoofer Project tool, you'll be able to test to see if your ISP or if your network is susceptible to spoofing. And if it is, please, please, please call your tech support number or contact your network administrator if you're within an enterprise and complain that they are not properly protecting the entire internet against spoofing attacks.
Right, right. Okay, so let's break this down now. We know that we've got a way to protect against these attacks. We know we have a way to mitigate them. We know that they shouldn't exist if carriers and system administrators were following BCP 38. So why is it so difficult to defend against this? And why is it most likely going to continue for years and years and years?
Well, I mean, hopefully it won't continue for years and years and years, but certainly past history suggests that it might. Again, if we go back to the historical internet, it was a very trusting place. We didn't feel like we needed to, as default, deny source addresses that we didn't recognize. Clearly, that assumption may have been wrong, and many, many more service providers are doing that today than they were in the past. There's a lot of excuses. It's very much a tragedy of the commons kind of situation. You have to remember that as a network operator, again, whether I'm an enterprise or service provider, doesn't really matter. I can't fix my problems alone simply by blocking spoofing attacks. Because spoofing attacks coming from my network are attacking other people, not necessarily attacking my network. So my motivation to spend the time and resources to tell an engineer within my organization to go and fix this problem they're not directly affected by these problems. So it's again, tragedy of the commons is really the best way to describe why it takes so long to fix this sort of thing.
Actually, I want to bring Curtis into this. Curtis Franklin, that's a very interesting statement that you just made, Brandon, and that is, well, if I'm an administrator, this is not really a problem for my network, right? If it's asymmetrical, there's not much traffic that's being generated on my network, even if it's the source of the attack. So therefore, I'm not going to spend my resources, I'm not going to spend my time on it. However, there is something that I know the guys at Interop are always talking about, and that is being a good internet citizen. It's the reason why Interop let go of an entire class A of addresses on the internet, because we knew, even though they were worth a lot of money, well, we just didn't need them. And we wanted to let the businesses that actually needed an IPv4 address have at it. Curtis, do you think it's a sustainable business model to start saying, look, we would like every enterprise to act as responsible internet citizens, and that's why we're going to make this change? Even though it costs us more resources, even though it costs us more time in our IT department, this is something that we're going to undertake just to be responsible.
Well, I think there are a couple of arguments to be made, and one of them certainly is the good citizen or good neighbor argument. You want to behave in ways that you'd like all of the other people on the network to behave, to avoid this tragedy of the commons that can become such a huge issue when these asymmetrical threats are out there. The other one is a little bit more self-serving, but I think it can be just as useful, and that is what I'm going to call the network hygiene issue. Even though this is something that doesn't have a profound impact on your network if you're the source of the traffic, it does mean that you're allowing your network to be used or allowing certain functions to be used by someone who is not in your employ. And that's just a matter of bad network hygiene, bad security. And I can imagine that there could be, in certain industries, compliance auditors who would take an interest in this, not so much from the impact that it's having on your network, but simply the fact that something is happening on your network that you're not in control of. I think that's a very profound argument, and that's one that executives understand very clearly. It's the same reason why, let's say on the physical side, the motor pool manager might say, we're going to lock all of our trucks because we don't want people sleeping in them at night. It's not that the people sleeping in them are doing great damage. We just don't want strangers sleeping in our trucks. It's the same sort of argument being made about this kind of network activity. Call it good network hygiene, and I think you get the attention of a lot more executives.
All right, Brandon, I want to go back to you for the last question of this segment, and that is taking this amplification attack, this reflection attack, knowing that it's difficult to track it back because of that spoofed IP address and that it's not a direct attack, it's an amplification attack. How would you, as a system administrator, as a routing protocol specialist, how would you do a forensic investigation of someone who has launched a NTP amplification attack against one of your networks?
Yes, well, you have to look at the network traffic directly or at least indirectly to detect that that's what's going on, that's the attack, and then attempt to start tracing it back to see if you can find if there's a source. The best tools to use for that would be to enable something like NetFlow throughout your network, where you collect data about the flows coming in and out of your network and then aggregate them. There's a number of tools, both commercial and open source, on the marketplace that allow you to visualize traffic flows within your network and their types. So I would start there. That'll give you an idea of where the traffic is coming from, what upstream service providers perhaps, and that'll also let you see if your NTP servers are being used to attack other people, which is a very big problem as well. Yeah. There's also, I should mention, to fix your NTP servers, and I believe you have a lower third for this as well, there's a great security team out there called Team Cymru, which is spelled CMYRU. If you go to their website, they have a guide on how to configure your NTP server to make it so that it can't be used to attack other people. And while, like we said before, the tragedy of the commons is a big problem for BCP 38, for your own NTP server, if your NTP server is used to attack other people, it will take down your network because it will fill up your pipes.
There you go. And again, either be a good network citizen or we'll take action against you. Now, gentlemen, all of my panelists, Curtis and Lou and Brandon, we're going to come right back to have a broadband brawl for it all. Are you guys up to that?
Definitely.
Sure.
All right. But before we do that, let's take a moment to thank the second sponsor of the Twilight Riot. You know them. You love them. And yes, Russell, our IT guy, loves them too. It's Ring Central. Now, when Leo built the brick house, he decided that we were going to dog food. We had been telling our audience forever that they should put all their services in the cloud, and we wanted to do the same thing. That's why our email is in the cloud. Our documents are in the cloud. Our scheduling is in the cloud. Heck, even our broadcasts are in the cloud. So when Russell, our IT guy, came to us and told us that we could have a full-featured PBX without having any of that clunky hardware in the basement, without having a dedicated person to maintain the system, and with having all our services in the cloud, well, it was a no-brainer. We love Ring Central. Zero startup costs, no PBX hardware to install or maintain. And now Ring Central has launched meetings. So in addition to all that we love about Ring Central, receiving voicemails through our emails, sending and receiving fax messages from our smartphones, the auto receptionist who greets our callers and announces employees and department extensions, now with meetings, we can host face-to-face meetings in high definition and share desktop or documents with anyone, anytime, anywhere, on any device. Meetings makes Ring Central the single best business platform on the market today. So here's what we want you to do. We want you to see if Ring Central will be as good a solution for you as it is for us. Ring Central offers all-inclusive pricing under $25 per month per user. You can start right now with a 30-day risk-free trial, and they have a special offer for my listeners. When you buy one desk phone, you get a second phone free, up to 20 phones. So call this number, designated for my listeners, 800-543-9980. That's 800-543-9980. One more time, just for the amplification, 800-543-9980. Or you can go to ringcentral.com and use the promo code TWIT. That's ringcentral.com, promo code TWIT. And we thank Ring Central for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Now let's get to it. Gentlemen, hopefully we've got a nice three-shot here, right, that we could throw in here because we have to. Yeah, there are my guys. All of you are specialists. All of you are experts in this broadband thing, right? This network delivery thing. So I thought now would be a nice time to talk about what it means that Comcast is making all this big ruckus. Let's start with the big story from a couple of weeks ago. Actually, it was released after the last episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that is Comcast has offered to buy Time Warner in an all-stock deal. No cash, just stock and debt assumption. Now, this means that the largest U.S. cable TV company would be buying the second largest cable TV company. This would add 11 million residential subscribers to Comcast customers, and it would give Comcast a reach into the very lucrative New York market. It would also give Comcast a lot of leverage with content developers, content makers, because they become the single biggest platform on which to release your content. It gives them about 30 million customers, which would give them about a third of all the pay TV customers in the country. And yes, it gives them that big bullet of being the big boy on the block. Now, they are doing a few things to mitigate the monopoly talk, and that is they're saying that they're going to sell off about 3 million subscribers so that they stay below that 30 million level that was the cap back in 1999. And it also plans to sell off some of their offerings in order to make it more competitive. Now, according to the FCC numbers, 75% of the country can choose only between two providers for broadband. Now, those numbers also include DSL and satellite service. With this acquisition, that's going to drop even lower. It'll be something like 60% can choose between two, and a good, 30-some% will only have one, again, including satellite. Here's my question to you, and I want to throw this over to you first, Curtis. When you look at this monopoly game, the shell game that Comcast is playing in trying to buy Time Warner, how, in any way, sense of the word, is this going to be consumer friendly?
Well, I don't know that it is consumer friendly, although you end up having to play it at a higher level than most people are, because let's face it, it's not as though you have Comcast and Time Warner competing in the same market in many places. So in one sense, you say, how is it uncompetitive? It's not as though you're taking an option away from most customers. I think you've hit the nail on the head, though, that what we're seeing is a world in which the people who control the network are the people who have the real power. And in this case, having control of the network going to that many subscribers gives them enormous leverage with the content providers, with other network providers. And it really does make them more than just the 900-pound gorilla. All of a sudden, they're the 2-ton gorilla in the network access space. And for our current legal and regulatory framework, that may just be a little bit too much monkey for the bars to bear.
Right. Now, Lou, I want to get to you in a bit because actually I think Microsoft has a big stake in what's happening in the consolidation of the network, because Microsoft is actually a huge online presence that can be affected by these mergers. But before we do that, I want to drop over to you, Brandon. You are a routing specialist. You are the guy that we turn to at Interop to make sure that all of our routes are published properly, to make sure that our network is designed properly. What are the ramifications of having a single provider be in charge of a third of all the high-speed data that's flowing throughout our country?
They are huge. Like Curtis said, for the individual consumer choice point of view, perhaps there's not a big deal because Time Warner and Comcast really don't overlap. But let's look at what else just came out recently in the news. You didn't mention it, but there was an article recently that said that Netflix is now paying Comcast in order to access their customers, in order to peer with them, is essentially what's going on. And this may seem like a simple business relationship on the surface, but if you dig in a little bit, you realize that just about everything is at stake as far as the internet goes and content that gets distributed over the internet. If Comcast is in a position already, even before the Time Warner merger, where they are able to effectively encourage content providers like Netflix to have to pay them to access customers whom are already paying Comcast for their service, can you imagine how much power that they'll have over Netflix and Hulu and any other internet content providers once they're consolidated with Time Warner?
All right. Well, that story was next on the dock, so I want to thank you for stealing that. But no, that's actually what I wanted to throw to Lou. There's been a lot of stories written about the Netflix Comcast deal, and in fact, there was a lot of really bad stories written about this deal. Brandon, did you notice that a lot of these stories were saying that it's a peering arrangement between Comcast and Netflix? And I was wondering, wait a minute, what network does Netflix own? Network doesn't have any fiber in the ground. It can't be a peering arrangement.
Well, they actually do have a network, and it is a peering arrangement. Now, the word peering is overloaded in many cases. Right. What we're talking about when we say peering in this context is that the Comcast network will talk directly and exchange traffic directly with Netflix and their network. But peering can mean a couple other things too. A lot of times when people say the word peering, what they mean is settlement-free peering, meaning what happens when major networks connect to each other to exchange traffic. So the model that we've always been under for a long time in the internet was the biggest guys all peered with each other, without settlement to each other for the most part. There's always exceptions, and I'm sure the chat rooms will light up with those. But for the most part, essentially without settlement, you buy service from your upstream service provider, and your upstream service provider exchanges traffic with another service provider who then delivers the traffic to the end user. In Netflix's case, they were buying service from Cogent, I believe, and then Cogent was peering with Comcast, and Comcast was delivering the traffic. Now, keep in mind, what happened is that Comcast said to Cogent, I'm not going to upgrade my links to you anymore. I'm just going to let them get congested. Now, it depends on who you ask, because all this information is confidential. So someone might say, well, it was actually Cogent that said they wouldn't upgrade their links. Well, who knows what the actual truth is? But if Comcast has all this power because they have all these end users, that's where I'm going to place my bet, is that Comcast said, I'm not upgrading my links anymore. And at some point, Netflix had to go and make a new arrangement because their quality was degrading over time.
Yeah. Let me throw over to you, Lou, because I think this leads directly into the question I wanted to ask of you. As Brandon mentioned, there has been a dangerous settlement, a dangerous precedent that has been set in this deal between Netflix and Comcast. In fact, just today, the CEO of Verizon has said he expects a settlement to be completed between Verizon and Netflix at any time, perhaps even today. So my question is this: if this is Netflix, if Netflix now, in this new environment of post-FCC net neutrality guidelines, has to go to each and every single major ISP and say, well, we're going to have to offer you a settlement. We're going to have to pay you to make sure that you don't denigrate our traffic. Remember, they're not saying we guarantee the level of our traffic. They're just saying, here's some money. Please don't impede our traffic. What does that do for a player like Microsoft, who is getting into cloud in a big way, either through Xbox, through enterprise? Microsoft is moving into a generation at the company where they expect their services to be streamed over the network. Will they have to start doing a Netflix? Will they have to go to Comcast and Verizon and Level 3 and Sprint and whoever else is playing the game and say, we're going to have to pay each of you separately to make sure that as our traffic passes through your network, you don't throttle us?
Yeah, again, it's a slippery slope. I mean, there's been a lot of slippery slopes lately in this industry, and this is just another one, I think, where they're getting into a dangerous game. And it's not like Brendan said, is in the past they've done it already in a third party way, and now they're doing it directly. And I think I'm not real sure exactly how it's going to affect overall, but I do know it's going to affect companies, especially ones who have lots of cash and can put forth such amount of cash to potentially get better bandwidth and better services. I mean, again, Comcast is creating a new business for that. And like you said, from a net neutrality standpoint, the little guys kind of lose out from that perspective. And sometimes even the big guys, because if somebody pays, sooner or later, there's going to be a point where a bunch of companies are going to pay for a whole bunch of bandwidth, and hoping that each company is then equated equal is not something that's going to be proven, right? So, I mean, somebody's always going to be better than the next if they're paying for bandwidth and paying for, latency and so on. So I think this is a slippery slope that Comcast is taking, and I don't necessarily, personally agree with it.
Now, Curtis, I want to throw it over to you, and hopefully we can get the voice of righteous indignation wrapped in honey. Here's the thing. Let's look at a typical stream from Netflix to me. I pay a transit fee to get onto a network. They pay a transit fee to get onto a network. They're now paying an additional settlement fee to Comcast, Comcast and to Verizon, probably to AT&T, not to slow down my traffic, and they're also paying per byte for that traffic to transit over any of the networks it has to transit over. So in any given scenario, we're paying 3 to 6 times for every bit of information that flows through a network. My question to you is, what are we paying for now? What exactly, how is this playing? How do you sell a service that you've already sold multiple times?
Well, I think that what you have right now are an awful lot of the network service providers who are looking at the oil pipelines as a model. And I think that's a terrible thing for the consumer. It's great for them. And let me explain that. When you look at oil pipelines, they stretch for hundreds and thousands of miles. The thing is, there are owners of those pipelines that may own as little as a foot of the pipeline. But if you own 1 foot of pipeline, you still collect tariffs for every gallon of crude or whatever is flowing through the pipeline that passes your foot. And you get a check for that every week or every month. That means that the people who buy and sell oil and other products by the barrel have to figure out what those tariffs are, what the cost of transporting a barrel of oil from point A to point B over thousands of miles and perhaps thousands of pipeline ownerships will be before it gets ultimately to the refinery and to the consumer. When people look at the price of a barrel of oil and wonder why the difference between a barrel of crude oil and a gallon of gas is so great, the pipeline cost is part of it. That same model is what a lot of these network companies are now looking at. They can exact tariffs for every bit that flows, and they're looking at what they see as their physical plan and saying, you know, once we have the model, then we can begin selling off pieces of this, reaping huge rewards for people who are going to do nothing but collect tariffs for every bit that flows over their bit of the network. I think this is a dangerous precedent. And to be brutally honest, as much as I enjoy economic freedom and tend to like unfettered rather than more fettered commerce, this is something that will not be good for either business or consumers and really needs to be addressed by a regulatory framework. The FCC has failed to do that. I'm not sure that I see great signs that they're going to be any more successful with their next version. And so, heaven help us, it may be time for someone in Congress to step in. One way or the other, though, we've got a few years of utter mess and confusion coming up while we settle this out between private treaties amongst companies and regulators trying desperately to catch up.
Now, folks, I want to move on to our last bit of this segment because we're running out of time. But I do want to mention a comment given to us by Kirst1 in the chat room who says, I hate Comcast as much as most folks, but to be fair, Netflix is 30 to 40% of the traffic. I can understand why Comcast wants extra money to handle that load. I just want to bring that as a counterpoint to everything we're talking about here. Of course, we hate it that this is happening. That sounds like a horrible, horrible idea, horrible, horrible precedent. But at the same time, I think you can make a decent argument to say that, look, Comcast is not talking about so-and-so who runs a blog. We're talking about someone who's taking a major chunk of the resources on their network, and that's why the deal was made. I'm not going to say whether it's right or wrong. That's for another show. Instead, my dear panelists, I would like you to focus on the last story, and that is the wild card. Google freaking Fiber. In fact, that might be the name of the episode. Google freaking Fiber. They announced that they're going to be expanding Google Fiber to 34 new cities. Now, 2012 saw the network open up in Kansas City. 2013 saw the network expand to Olathe, North Kansas, Austin, and Provo. In 2014, the service could expand to, oh gosh, this is a lot, Phoenix, Scottsdale, Tempe in Arizona, San Jose, Santa Clara, Sunnyvale, Mountain View, Palo Alto in California, Atlanta, Avondale Estates, Brookhaven, College Park, Decatur, East Point, Harperville, Sandy Springs, SEMA in Georgia, Raleigh, Durham, Carbo, Cary, Chapel Hill, Garner, Mooresville, Charlotte, North Carolina, Portland, Beaverton, Hillsborough, Gresham Lake, Oswego, Tigard, Oregon, Nashville, Davidson in Tennessee, San Antonio in Texas, and Salt Lake City in Utah. This is a huge expansion. This is way more than we expected out of Google at this time. And it seems to me, and let me start with you, Lou, this seems to me that this is coming at exactly the right time, right? If you've got some of the major players who are starting to play it fast and loose with a non-regulated industry, it's great that there's one player who's going to come in and say, no, we're going to run a high-speed network, we're going to sell it at reasonable prices, and we're going to put very little restrictions on it.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think maybe that could be some of the reasons behind some of the movements that even Comcast might be making around buying Time Warner and so on, is they're feeling a little pressure from these smaller networks that are basically expanding at the exponential growth that they're doing. So like Google's one of the biggest ones, because obviously they have a lot of backing behind it from a tech company. But there are smaller networks out there that are fiber networks that have been trying to do it in a while. They don't know a lot of local areas around here have their own fiber networks set up. They pay regulatory fees and so on, and jump on some of the bigger pipelines as a fiber network. One's called the Issaquah Highlands Fiber Network or something like that. And there's a lot of those popping up all over the place if the community can afford it. But again, Google coming in and doing it at a much grander scale, I think, is important not only for the comparison of the two, but also to make sure that the prices stay down and the competitive nature stays up.
Yeah. Let me throw this over to you, Brandon. Google is a top-tier network, right? I mean, they have their own network. They own their own fiber. They run everything between the data center and the customer, which no other carrier, Comcast withstanding, has the ability to do. What kind of disruption could they have in the industry if they really are going to do this? And I think at the beginning we thought that maybe it was just a joke, maybe it was just a publicity stunt. But now it seems serious that Google's saying, no, we want to give you the pipe so that you could get all of our services and anything else that you want.
Obi-Wan Google, you're my only hope. I agree. It's absolutely necessary to have a player like Google in the market. I agree that there are many smaller providers out there, but they're unfortunately never going to really be able to have the kind of resources that Google has to build a far-reaching, very high-quality, very low-cost network. Now, there's concerns with Google operating your network too. I was just having a conversation with a good friend of mine last night, and she was concerned about the privacy considerations when all of your traffic is going through Google's network. We know that Google makes most of their money not by selling you services and giving you a search engine, but by selling your data to their customers. So you are the customer to Google. Your data is your customer to Google. So there's other considerations to take into account. Me personally, I'm happy to give up a little bit of that in order to be able to get Netflix and all my other content without being dictated to by large monopolies.
Right. Right. Now, Curtis, I want to throw this over to you really quickly, because one of the things that's been speculated about this Google deal, this huge list of 34 cities, is Google is testing the waters, poking at local politicians and saying, hey, guess what? If you want us in your city, we're more than happy to do the capital outlay, but you need to streamline the process by which you approve this sort of work. We don't want to have to file 50,000 petitions to run through Seattle. If you can streamline it for us and say, okay, you've now got right-of-way because this is going to be a public utility, then we're willing to come into your city. Do you see this taking on? I mean, could this happen in a city like San Francisco, which is notorious? In fact, we had the CEO of SonicNet come up and tell us that it costs about $5,000 per house passed, not house served, but house passed to run fiber. If these cities can get their act together and realize that this Comcast-Time Warner merger is bad for them, AT&T monopoly is bad for them, and finally say, we want another competitor and we're willing to streamline the process to have that other competitor, is that ultimately the disruptive force that Google becomes?
Well, on the one hand, I'm not sure that there is a company large enough to be able to make San Francisco an affordable place to do business. But leaving that aside, I think that exactly what you talk about is what's going on. We talked about in the Comcast merger, the effect that they could have just being able to influence so much of the market. I think that what Google is trying to do is get enough cities on board that they can go to other municipalities and say, you know what? This is the sort of thing that becomes a competitive advantage for the cities that have already allowed it. If you want economic development, if you want happy citizens, if you want new businesses in the high-tech arena, you really need to make this happen. We've shown what the results can be. You need to look and make it happen in your city.
Yeah. I want to leave it with Lou. Lou, you actually, I believe, have some personal experience with this. again, one of the speculations has been that Google is trying to force some of these cities to disregard the pressure that they're getting from the Comcast or AT&T or Verizon, who want to make it very difficult for a newcomer to come into the city and lay their fiber. You have this going on in Seattle, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's really kind of interesting the way things have gone. I think the previous mayor, Mike McGinn, I think his name was, he tried to actually get Google to bring their fiber to the city of Seattle. But again, then that was during the times of election, and Comcast, I think, at the time had an exclusive deal with Seattle around getting, providing their service, and so then of course Comcast kind of jumped on to lobbying and giving a bunch of money to the other mayor. So it's kind of a controversy here around trying to prevent them from coming in such a way. So I mean, it's tough for cities, especially when it's during election time. If an elected official tries to get Google to come, it could potentially be blocked by these big players who have deep pockets.
Right. Well, gentlemen, I'm sorry. We could go on this discussion forever, but we have run out of time. I do want to leave us with one little bit of a story that we picked up just a few hours ago. You may remember we covered on Twiat a few weeks back how the Time Warner CTO came out and publicly said, look, people just don't want high speed. That's why we don't have it, because there's no demand. Well, just yesterday, they had a representative who said they're now bringing 1 gigabit per second fiber to Austin because their customers want it. So I don't know if that's the disruptive force of Google, but I think it's a move in the right direction. I want to thank everyone who was on the panel today, starting with you, Curtis. It's so good to have you back after a few weeks away. I know you had issues with your family, and I was right there with you, but it's always a better show when you're with us. Do you want to tell the folks where they can find you and Enterprise Efficiency?
Well, Padre, thanks very much. It's good to be back, and it's good to feel the support of everyone here at Twiat. Now, as for me and Enterprise Efficiency, I am doing a regular series of Interop preview radio shows. As a matter of fact, this Thursday, 2 o'clock Eastern Time, I'm going to have Glenn Evans, the lead architect for the InteropNet, as my guest. Would love to have folks from the Twiat Riot there to ask him questions. That's going to be happening every Thursday, a new guest right up to Interop. And at Interop, I'm going to be doing a daily radio show from the show floor. In the meantime, I'm also going to be at Enterprise Connect in Orlando in a couple of weeks. You can always find my writing at enterpriseefficiency.com. Follow me on Twitter, KG4GWA.
As always, Curtis, you are a prince. Now, an upcoming prince, Mr. Lou Maresca, thank you again for being on Twiat. I got to say, I mean, you were on one of the very first episodes of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and it is just a joy to have you back every time you grace us with your presence.
Thanks for having me again.
You want to tell people how they can find you?
Yeah, definitely. Lou MM on Twitter. Also, check me out. It could be at Convergence 2014. It's a conference Microsoft gives out every year for enterprise, and we presenting some CRM stuff there. So come check me out. Come to my session.
Fantastic. And last but not least, Mr. Brandon Ross. Sir, it is always a pleasure to work with you. I mean, I've been working with you for a decade, even before I was on the Twit TV network, and it's always nice to be able to pick your brain. Tell the folks, I mean, I'm sure that they've been duly impressed with how much you know about routing protocols and network. Tell them how they find you, and maybe those people who really, really need help, how they could contract with you.
Sure. So my company is Network Utility Force. You can see us on the web at www.netuf.net. And you can email me at netuf.net by first letter, last name, B. Ross. Also, I wanted to mention, I'm actually about to have the very same Glenn Evans give me a ride to the airport here in a second. I'm heading down to San Diego. Tomorrow is the North American Network Operators Group on the road event. It's a one-day, and it's for free. They even feed you and give you drinks for free. And it's all about spreading news about how to have best good network operations and good network etiquette, as Curtis mentioned. Also, I'll be at CompTel. I'm actually moderating a panel on 100 gig networking. It's at 9:15 a.m. on March 17th in Las Vegas. So come see me there. As well as the Global IPv6 Forum in Dallas. That's March 27th. And of course, I'll be out at Interop along with Curtis.
And if any of you see him at Interop, feel free to throw a foam ball over the knock wall. He loves that. Gentlemen, thank you for being part of the best dang enterprise podcast in the universe. That's according to 1 out of 1 popes that I've actually asked in the last week. I want to thank everyone here who has made the show possible, but specifically you. That's right, you, the audience member, the person who downloads our podcast to listen to on the drive home or cuddle up with a loved one and watch on your big screen TV. Well, we want to do something for you. We want to give you a way to download each and every single episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech so you can get your network goodness automatically. Go to our show page at twit.tv/Twyet. There you'll be able to find all of our episodes and how you can get them into your iPad, your iPhone, your Android phone or tablet, your laptop, your desktop, your zombie Zune. We give it all because we want you to have the show when you want the show. Also, did you know that we've got a YouTube page? You can find us at youtube.com/Twyet. There you'll be able to find not just all of our shows, but also all of our individual segments. Stuff My IT Guy Says, The Data Center, Pro Gear, all those little tidbits that we do throughout the year to learn you up on the technology, the techniques, and the methods that make IT go. Also, you can follow me on Twitter at twitter.com/PadreSJ. That's at PadreSJ. If you follow me, you'll be able to find out what I do during the week when I'm not being an Enterprise Geek and keep up on all the other shows that I do here on the Twit TV network. Also, did you know that we do this show live? That's right, every week, Mondays at 2:30 p.m. Pacific time. We're here at live.twit.tv. And if you come and watch, you can see the pre-show, the post-show, all the things that don't go into the final cut. And as long as you're watching live, why not jump into our chat room at irc.twit.tv so you could talk to some of the brightest engineers, some of the funniest trolls, and yes, partake in the experiment that is twit.tv. Finally, I want to thank everyone here in the Brick House who made this show possible, to Lisa, to Leo, and to my TD Jason, who right now I'm going to put on a face of bewilderment and say, Jason, I think you do a show on the Twit TV network about some sort of robot, yeah?
Hey, how's it going? Yes, I do. It's called All About Android. And actually, tomorrow's going to be a very cool show because, well, Mobile World Congress in Barcelona is happening. So there's tons of Android news. We have Marquez Brownlee of YouTube fame joining us. So we're going to have a lot of stuff to talk about tomorrow.
Wow.
You won't want
that's
to miss it.
Twit.tv
Twit.tv/AAA to find it after the fact, or 5 p.m. Pacific at live.twit.tv tomorrow night.
Yeah. And see, folks, that tells you what kind of podcast network we have when such a talent, someone like Jason Howell, who is an all-star in his own right, is also running TD for Twyet. I mean, wow, right? Seriously, wow. Well, that's about it for This Week in Enterprise Tech. I'm Father Robert Ballasare, just reminding you that if you want to know what's going on in the enterprise, just keep Twyet.